Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on the ancient Levant. Now, today, we are not just looking at some static, boring map. We're looking at a deeply dynamic arena, a brutal but totally beautiful landscape that actively dictated survival, wealth, and warfare in the ancient world. The dirt beneath their feet literally wrote their history. So that brings us to the big, core question of our journey today. How exactly did a pile of hills and valleys shape biblical history? Well, to find out, we're going to take a literal road trip. We'll cross from the highly contested western foothills, pushing all the way out to the remote Red Mountains of the east, just to uncover the geopolitical truth that's written right into the terrain itself. Here's a quick look at our itinerary for this grand topographical tour. We'll kick things off in the contested border lowlands, move up to the highlands of kings and prophets, venture into the southern deserts, drop way down into the copper mines of the Rift, and finally, we'll ascend the red highlands of Edom. All right, stop number one, the contested border lowlands, or as it's historically known, the Shephelah. To really wrap our heads around this region, we need to understand the terminology. Shephelah is a Hebrew word that basically means lowland or foothills. Geographically, it consists of a series of meandering valleys stretching from the high hill country down out toward the coast. Think of it as a giant geological staircase sitting between two vastly different worlds. What's absolutely fascinating here is how these valleys essentially functioned as ancient superhighways. Look at this sequence. You've got the Ayalon Valley, guarded by the gateway city of Gezer. That's where Solomon fortified his kingdom and where Joshua famously saw the sun stand still. Move south, and there's the Sorek Valley, guarded by Beth Shemesh, which was Samson's old stopping ground, and the exact route the Ark of the Covenant took when it was returned. Next up is the Elah Valley, watched over by Azekah, literally the famous battleground of David and Goliath. And finally, the Lachish Valley, dominated by Lahash, the second largest city in Judah. Every single valley had a gateway city acting as a heavy lock on the door to the highlands. Notice the stark contrast here, because it's a real game changer. You had the Israelites up in the elevated, secure inland hill country. Down below them, on the flat, easily accessible coastal plain, you had the Philistines. The Shephelah? Well, it was caught right in the middle. If the Israelites were feeling strong, they pushed the Philistines to the coast. But if the Philistines were strong, they pushed the Israelites right back up into the hills. It was a constant, incredibly violent geopolitical tug-of-war zone. Right here in the Elah Valley, you were looking at the actual arena for the ultimate mano-a-mano contest, David versus Goliath. The Israelites camped on one side, the Philistines on the other. Just nearby is the site of Khirbet Kiafa, an ancient fortress with two gates sitting right in this volatile zone. And further down the valley is the Philistine city of Gath, where archaeologists actually found an ostracon, basically a piece of inscribed pottery, with a variation of the name Goliath on it. You are literally staring at the theater of biblical warfare. Gives you a real you-are-there feeling, doesn't it? And, to control that kind of chaotic theater, you needed massive defenses. What we're looking at is the famous six-chamber gate built by King Solomon at Gezer. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. Controlling these lowlands mattered immensely. If you held the Shephelah, you controlled the access routes right up to the capital itself. Moving on to part two, the highlands of kings and prophets, specifically focusing on the hill country of Judah. Now, we find a really remarkable tale of two palaces up here, separated by millennia. In this region, we've got the ancient ruins of Gibeah, which is widely considered the capital of King Saul. But right nearby, sitting totally unfinished, is a modern summer palace started by King Hussein of Jordan back in 1967, just before the Six-Day War broke out. Looking at both of these structures side by side perfectly illustrates the enduring strategic value of this vista. From these heights, you could see the Mediterranean to the west and the Jordan Valley to the east. It's the ultimate geographical power view. But that security came at a seriously steep topographical price. Just look at this dramatic panoramic view from Bethlehem. It shows a sheer drop down into the Judean wilderness and the Dead Sea below. I mean, from around 2,500 feet above sea level, the land just plunges to 1,400 feet below sea level at the Dead Sea. So why does this matter? Well, because while the highlands offered elevated strongholds, they were constantly bordered by a sheer, unforgiving, and desolate wilderness. Literally, one wrong step eastward and boom, you were in the wasteland. Speaking of unforgiving terrain, let's head to Section 3 and trek southward to survive the southern deserts, an area known as the Negev. Now, the Hebrew word negeb translates roughly to dry or south wind, which pretty much perfectly frames this inhospitable transition zone. But please don't let the barrenness fool you. The Negeb had immense strategic economic importance. This harsh zone guarded the highly lucrative spice routes leading out to the Mediterranean ports of Gaza and Ashkelon. By controlling the Negeb, Solomon's kingdom was able to extract massive toll income from those passing caravans. And to protect that incredible wealth, a mysterious network of paramilitary hilltop forts was established across the hills in the 11th and 10th centuries. Take a look at Arad, for instance. It was a major fortified site in the eastern Negeb. Here you can see the excavated early Bronze Age city and the later Israelite citadel. Survival out here wasn't just about finding enough water to live. It was about aggressively protecting a kingdom's economic lifeline. Those mysterious forts out in the wilderness of Zin, they weren't just random outposts. They were the ancient equivalent of heavily armed toll booths. All right, let's drop even deeper into Section 4, the copper mines of the Rift, otherwise known as the Areva. Now, the Arava is this blistering, deep geological depression stretching all the way south to the Gulf of Eilat. But before we get into the heavy ancient industry, here's a fun, surprising little fact about the Arava today. The ancient oasis of Yovata, situated right in the middle of this scorching ancient rift, is actually famous in modern times for producing amazing chocolate milk. Seriously, it's a sweet oasis of dairy right in the middle of an otherwise brutal, sun-baked landscape. But let's flash back 3,000 years. Back then, the Arava was famous for a much heavier export, copper. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive scale of ancient industry. Recent excavations at sites like Khirbet and Nahas, which literally translates to ruins of copper, and Timna have uncovered enormous mining operations. We're talking 10th century radiocarbon dating that confirms this was a kingdom-level polity driving a massive industrial machine, very likely the work of Solomon. And get this, archaeologists even found ancient donkey dung perfectly preserved in the gateway corrals. No way, right? But that is vivid, tangible proof of the pack animals that kept this bustling ancient industry moving. And, of course, all that copper had to go somewhere, right? It needed a way out to the wider world. Consider Coral Island, situated down in the Gulf of Aqaba. It features a sheltered lagoon and is actually a really strong candidate for King Solomon's legendary lost seaport of Etzion Geber. Why is this so crucial? Because it shows the rift wasn't just some desolate depression, it was a humming industrial powerhouse and the ultimate gateway to global maritime trade. Finally, we reach Section 5. We're crossing the rift and climbing a staggering 3,500 feet up into the breathtaking heights of the Red Highlands of Edom, located over in the Transjordan. Did you know the name Edom is actually derived from the Hebrew word Adama, which means red? It perfectly reflects the distinctive, stunning reddish hue of the region's Nubian sandstone. The very kingdom literally takes its linguistic identity directly from the stone landscape it is built upon. And wow, what a kingdom it was. Just look at this spectacular view from Mount Hor. This is the traditional burial site of Moses' brother Aaron, and it's layered with both Muslim and Byzantine history. From this peak, looking back across the Arava all the way over to the wilderness of Zin, you can see just how commanding this high ground was. Standing up here, looking over that vast rift, it is immediately clear how controlling these heights absolutely dictated regional power. So we've journeyed from those contested borderlands all the way to the red peaks of Edom. And we've seen firsthand how deeply geography dictated the destiny, the economies, and the wars of these ancient peoples. It's like a giant puzzle where the land itself is the most important piece, which leaves us with one final, pretty compelling question. As archaeologists continue to sift through the dust of the Levant, what other lost chapters of history are still out there, just waiting to be unearthed in these harsh, beautiful landscapes? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, stay curious and keep learning.